Alright, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and today we're going to be talking about the Acolyte Episode 7, the penultimate episode, Choice. And after weeks and weeks of stretching out this series to its very limits, we finally get the full backstory of what happened on Brandok 16 years ago with the disaster and conflict between the Jedi and the Coven. We get the Jedi's perspective in this episode. And to no one's surprise, the reveal is nowhere near the severity that it was built up to be throughout this series. There's no big surprise here, and no, this doesn't fix the series. It doesn't make everything that happened before make more sense. If anything, it just adds to the low-quality story that we've been given so far. And this is no different from that. And anyone that was saying, oh, we have to wait to see the full story, oh, we have to wait to see what happens in the flashback of what really happened that night, just take this as a lesson that if a show isn't good in the moment, if its writing isn't consistent, if it isn't delivering on the basics of storytelling, it's probably not going to deliver on the big thing that it's building up in the background. A lackluster story to start is not going to magically become some revelation by the end. Yes, some stories get better over time as the writers get used to the characters, but in the case of The Acolyte, where lazy writing and convenience has been spray painted all over this script, there just wasn't a world where this penultimate episode was going to amount to anything other than the below average content we've been getting so far. This episode has all the typical staples of the stuff I've been criticizing The Acolyte about for 7 weeks now. We have very rushed character motivations and connections between characters. We have characters contradicting themselves just to fit the theme of the story and paint the Jedi as the bad guys, even though this episode pretty much paints the Jedi exactly how we've always seen the Jedi, but is trying to convince us that this was different and that the Jedi screwed up, even though I think it's very clear that the Coven were the aggressors in this situation. The only thing you can argue that the Jedi really messed up with was that Sol picked Osha over May when they were both falling. To add insult to injury, this episode also recycles so many scenes from the third episode. Typically, when you're telling a story from a different perspective, you're not seeing the same exact scenes, you're seeing the scenes with a new lens. And in this case, they just simply recycle some lines of dialogue and some shots from episode 3, and it just feels really lazy and really not compelling storytelling, especially in a mystery show where the perspectives are everything. I don't really know where to start with this episode. I didn't enjoy any piece of this. There was no redeeming qualities to this episode for me. The only redeeming quality is that they do mention the hyperspace disaster from the High Republic novels. So, of course, that was cool to hear as a book fan, but I'm not here for the Easter eggs, and the mention of it doesn't affect the story in the slightest, so it doesn't get that much brownie points from me. I think I'll start with Sol's apparent connection to Osha. As with most things in the show, we just jump from one extreme to the next with characters, and we don't understand why they're taking these leaps, and the show doesn't take time to really build it out. In the case of Sol and Osha, this episode was supposed to give us that perspective from Sol of why he felt so connected with Osha, and we don't get that. We simply see him stumble across him and May in the forest. He sees that they are force sensitive. He follows them for a bit, and then he sees their mother, or from his perspective, just an adult, reprimand them for being alone in the forest, which any normal person would not see as something odd or out of place. An adult reprimanding children for being out in a dangerous forest, that seems very logical. So why Sol was so horrified by this makes no sense, and that's the jumping off point of why he feels the connection to Osha and why she feels she is unsafe. So that foundation itself is extremely shaky and makes no sense. I mean, he climbs a mountain off this little interaction he sees in the woods. Again, if this show had the guts to do it, they would have shown some sort of abuse from Mother Krell or whatever her name is, and that abuse from the outside would have been a bigger motivating factor for Sol to be like, oh, I have to step in. But Sol doesn't see any, I guess, abuse until he gets into the compound and he sees the mother just push the children over with the force, which, again, I'm not saying is the best parenting, but it isn't anything objectively terrible. And if he just stayed longer than 5 minutes looking at them, he would have seen that the mother was very loving of her children. I'm pretty sure in episode 3 we see that she takes the time to talk to them and hug them and give them love and affection. So If Soul simply just stayed around, he probably would have seen that. The big thing here, and something that the show's been doing wrong since the beginning, is characters say things, but that doesn't make them true. Just because the script has a character say something, it doesn't mean that the audience automatically has to take it at face value. If Jack and Rose said they loved each other within the first scene of the Titanic, the audience would ask some questions like, well, why do these two strangers love each other? The same thing can be applied here with Soul and why he's so connected to Osha. We don't see anything that would make him feel connected to Osha. We don't see her laying in bed feeling a forced connection with Soul at his camp. We don't see any of that. We just jump to the conclusion at the end where Soul will risk anything to save Osha and not May. The show tries to explain this away by having Indara tell Soul that he's only seeing what he wants, and maybe that's why it's clouding his vision, and he's being possessive of Osha, and that's a path to the dark side. This would all be fine if they took the time to actually establish the relationship between Soul and Osha beforehand, but they don't, so it falls flat. The next character I have to talk about is Torben, and just how astonishingly terrible this story arc is for this character, not just in Star Wars, but also the message that it sends outside of Star Wars related to his suicide. So Torben is a Padawan at the time of this flashback on Brandok, and his main motivating factor throughout this entire episode, and he repeats it multiple times, is that he just wants to get back to Coruscant. He's bored of this mission, and he feels like his time's being wasted here. And I get that he's a teenager. I get that teenagers, and even Padawan teenagers, can be rebellious, but this motivating factor for him, and the fact that he's crying over it in one scene, just feels extremely shallow, and as an audience member, it's not very compelling character work. Also, the fact that he says they've been on the planet for 7 weeks, but he didn't even know what their mission was, so he's just been on this planet for 7 weeks, and they never gave him a briefing about why he's going to this planet, even though there's no reason to be secretive. And the only reason that they did that is that so they could have exposition on what the Vergence is and what this concentration of force energy on this planet is coming from. It's all just expositional writing for the sake of exposition, because realistically Torben should have known why they were on the planet and they didn't need to explain this again, but the audience needed to know it, so they were very uncreative in the way that they presented it, so they just made Torben say, "What are we doing here?" The most problematic thing that comes out of Torben's character is, of course, that he really doesn't do anything wrong in this entire mission. I mean, he runs off to get Osha and May when they find out that they might be the cause of the Vergence. But he doesn't kill anyone out of spite or anger. He defends himself against the witches. He gets taken control of by the witches. And in the end, he gets attacked by Kelnaka, a master Jedi who's a Wookiee, and gets brutally injured. And we're supposed to believe that he's so guilty of doing pretty much nothing wrong except covering up the truth of what happened on this planet. But again, he was defending himself. He wasn't the cause of killing all of these Coven witches. All of this leads him to kill himself 10 years later. And I think this is just extremely problematic. Not that I really supported the idea of a Jedi killing themselves on screen or committing suicide in Star Wars, but it sends such a terrible message to kids watching Star Wars that the smallest thing could be a perfectly viable reason to kill yourself. And I think modern media has not glorified suicide, but they've presented it and been so flippant in the way that they've presented it as a shock factor in storytelling that it loses its weight. I know 13 Reasons Why, when that show had aired and had the vision of championing mental health for teenagers and finding therapy, but in the end, because the show showed suicide in such a visceral and graphic way, teen suicide rates still kept going up. So the impact of the show completely missed the mark, and in the process might have almost inadvertently caused more teen suicides. And I know that was kind of a tangent, but bringing it back to Torben, not that suicide should ever be justified, but the reason that Torben killed himself now feels so small and insignificant that it doesn't match the weight of taking your own life. It just feels like, again, something that was put in for shock value, and it makes me very upset that they thought that this was compelling. And I think in the opposite, it sends a completely terrible message to kids and almost spits in the face of George Lucas trying to teach kids with Star Wars how to deal with life. And instead this says, here's the easy way out. There's no way out of the darkness. I was very upset with this. Not that I was ever going to be fully okay with the suicide of Master Torben, but if they had shown something truly horrific had happened and he caused it or was a big part of it, then the suicide would have been maybe more contextualized. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that. I was really disappointed that they did this with Torben's character. The next thing I want to talk about is Mother Anastasia and her role in this whole disaster that happened. A lot of her scenes are recycled in this, so we don't get that much new stuff with her. We see how she gets into the head of Torben at one point, which was at least some interesting camera work. But what I really want to focus on is the scene where the Jedi do come to pick up May and Osha out of protection. And she says, "Oh, you thought we would let you take our children?" After just telling Osha that she was okay to leave because it was her decision, and she stuck up for Osha in front of all of the other witches and said, "Osha's made her decision. She's my child. I want to support her decision." And then when Sol says that he wants to protect the children, she turns into this black mist monster thing and starts to make May disappear. And Sol at this point thought that May was Osha, so he was trying to protect her. And why wouldn't he take out his lightsaber and try and stop the mother here when she is literally making a child vanish and she's turning into this horrifying black mist? And then after he stabs her, she says, "I was going to let her go," after just saying that she was not going to let the children go. So this whole scene just feels like, again, them trying to force this idea that, look how bad the Jedi are, look how far they'll go to take children away or to control the Force, or how misguided they are, when in reality, again, the witches are at fault here. The Jedi are trying to protect these two children, and this entire scene just feels so baffling. And what Mother Anastasia's character motivations are is completely confusing because, again, characters in the show jump from one end of the spectrum to the other every single scene they're in. But yeah, Sol's the bad guy because he stopped the mother from making a child disintegrate or whatever was happening there. I don't even know what that force power is. Since I mentioned May and Osha, we don't get too much new stuff with them. We do get a lot of new stuff from May's perspective. We see that she does start the fire because Mother Coral tells her to stop Osha from leaving and attacks May and tells her, use your anger, use your fear to defend and stop the Jedi from taking Osha. So she starts the fire and it gets out of hand. So we see this new perspective that she didn't mean to start this big fire. And again, this feels like the same thing that happened with Reva in the Obi-Wan series and how Disney has failed to do these redemption or new perspective arcs for these characters that we're supposed to eventually have empathy for, but they've made the character so unlikable through the first 6 episodes, and they've made the character so inconsistent through 6 episodes that when we do get the shoe drop of their true backstory and what really happened, we don't really care, and we don't really empathize with them anymore now that we understand that, oh, May was abused by Mother Coral and she accidentally started the fire and didn't mean for it to grow. And Sol essentially let her drop and die. Like, all of these things are valuable. They could have been shown earlier in the show and we would have connected with May more, but instead the show prioritized this apparent mystery plot, and instead of being in service of the characters, they built the show to stretch out this vagueness so that we didn't know what really happened, and so that they could have this air of mystery about the show, when in reality they just aren't giving us all the information. And in the end, May's character suffers for it. If they just showed in episode 3 that May survived the fall and her anger was fueling her to survive and that she has this vendetta against Master Sol, very justifiedly, because he literally let her drop and saved her sister over her instead of prioritizing both of their lives, that would have been something that we could latch onto with the character of May. But again, they hid it behind the curtain because they were like, ooh, mystery, 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 and now May's character is worse off for it. This is also just ignoring the fact that Sol decides to hold up the 2 bridges, which are objectively heavier than just holding up the 2 girls and picking up the 2 girls and bringing them back to the ledge. That's just something that, again, the plot makes things happen, but do they make any logical sense? No. I'm pretty sure a Master Jedi could pick up 2 10-year-old children. I don't even know. Might be younger. I'm pretty sure they could do that, but no, the plot doesn't want us to do that. It doesn't want to make any sense. So the last thing I want to talk about, and I think this pissed me off more than anything that this show has done so far, and it wasn't even something that happened in the show. It's the credit song. They have this pop tie-in song by Victoria Monet, and this is nothing against her. I'm sure she got a nice piece of that $180 million budget. But what the hell is a pop tie-in song doing in Star Wars? This is just the most gross corporate executive boardroom decision I've ever seen in Star Wars, and goes directly against the very fabric of the franchise. I mean, this is knowing your franchise 101. Why would we want a pop song in Star Wars? It just blows my mind that this got by people. Again, I think this was bulldozed by the executive board. They said, oh, all the big franchises have pop tie-in songs, so we need one. And it just feels so out of place here. And I'm simply just in shock that a Star Wars end credit now has a pop song playing over it. I mean, that just like spits in the face of John Williams and all the great composers that have contributed to Star Wars over the years. And this is just so egregious. I've put it up on my story, the fact that this is here, and the amount of responses that I've gotten and the just overall backlash that this has gotten on the internet just proves that Star Wars fans know what Star Wars is and the feeling and the ethos of Star Wars, and this just isn't it. So whoever had their hand in this is just money grubbing, and I absolutely hate that this is in the show. And the final thing I want to end on is just a little bit of a lighter note, but we were talking in our group chats about the Acolyte and how bad it is. And one of my friends, Kyle, who's been on the podcast, he's been on the Scores of Star Wars, he's had his own Star Wars Story interview. He said, did I just watch a Wookiee Jedi try to find the Force with a metal detector? It's just like the perfect epitome of what the Acolyte is. Why a group of Jedi Masters wouldn't be able to sense a vergence in the Force. If this is a huge concentration of the Force, why would Jedi not be able to sense it or find the origin of it? These Jedi throughout this entire series have just once again been proven to be the most unaware, un-Jedi-like Jedi that we've had throughout Star Wars. Master Soul can't tell Osha and May apart. He can't sense them in the Force. The Jedi here can't sense this great mass of Force energy. They feel so watered down and disingenuous to the Jedi Order. And I know so many people will be like, well, the point of this series is to actually show that the Jedi, I know what they're trying to do. I get it. But you can't simply dumb down the Jedi Order to try and prove a point. You have to keep the Jedi Order the same and then tell compelling storylines around it to show how the Jedi Order reacts and changes to those outside forces. You can't just bring the Jedi Order down a peg as a starting point and then say, oh, look, see how dumb the Jedi Order is? See how bad they are for the galaxy? Like, no, that's not how it works. The Clone Wars didn't make the Jedi different than the prequel Jedi. They used the same prequel Jedi, and they just added outside forces of war, conflict, politics, and showed how fish out of water they are and how it changed them. In this series, the Jedi are just dumb for the sake of being dumb so that the series can prove a point, which it has done poorly. So yeah, that's really all I have to say. I don't have any positives from this episode, really. I mean, yeah, sure, seeing a Wookiee Jedi fight is cool, but it's also connected to this scene where all the witches die because for some reason, I don't know. But yeah, that's all I have. I would love to hear what you guys think of the episode. I'm sure there's plenty of other things I could dive into, but it's not really worth my time or effort. So I'm just going to wrap this up right here. You can follow me on Instagram at @star_wars_mark of balance. Would love to hear your thoughts on the series. If you are liking it, that's great. If you're not liking it, that's also great. Want to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions. If you could leave me a review on whatever streaming service you're listening to this on, I would really appreciate it. And I guess we will see what happens next week in the finale. I'm not sure how much worse it could get, but we'll see. As always, thank you guys so much for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.